For decades, Pierce Brosnan has been the embodiment of suave elegance, a man whose presence lit up the screen, whose voice carried quiet wisdom, and whose life story captured both triumph and tragedy. But now, at 72, the beloved actor is stepping away from the spotlight, and the reasons have left fans stunned and his family in tears. In this emotional documentary, we explore not a scandal, not a downfall, but something far more intimate, the legacy of a man who has lived through unbearable loss, rebuilt himself from the ashes, and quietly prepared something extraordinary for the people he loves most. Behind closed doors, Brosnan has spent the last several years making decisions that speak louder than any role he has ever played, decisions that reveal the true depth of his heart. From the quiet estate in Hawaii where he paints alone at sunrise, to the charitable foundations he has supported without ever seeking attention, to the private letters he has written to each of his children. Pierce Brosnan has crafted a farewell that reaches far beyond material wealth. But what truly shocked his family wasn't the size of the fortune he accumulated, though it is staggering, it was the meaning behind where every dollar is going. His choices have stirred tears, gratitude, and heartbreak in equal measure. This is the untold story of Pierce Brosnan's final gift, a gift shaped by love, loss, and a lifetime of quietly fighting battles the world never saw. The story begins far from the red carpets and flashing cameras, in a modest home on the coast of Navan, Ireland. Pierce Brendan Brosnan was born into circumstances that could hardly predict the global icon he would one day become. Raised primarily by relatives after his father walked away and his mother moved abroad for work, young Pierce grew up feeling the kind of loneliness that molds a person's entire future. He learned early what absence feels like, and, perhaps because of that, he later devoted his life to making sure his own children never felt it. When he turned 11, his world shifted again. Pierce joined his mother in London, discovering not only a new life, but also the spark of a dream. He found comfort in art, sketching, painting, imagining better worlds than the one he knew. No one then could have predicted that this quiet boy would rise to become James Bond himself, commanding millions on screen and earning a legacy etched permanently into cinematic history. But even after he reached worldwide fame, Pierce never forgot the sense of instability that shaped him. It's why he lived with a quiet discipline, why he protected his family from the spotlight, and why, unknown to many, he began making long-term financial plans decades before most stars even consider it. For Pierce, providing was not about wealth. It was about security, love, and leaving behind something meaningful. Yet life tested him in ways harsher than fame ever could. The greatest blow came with the illness and tragic death of his first wife, Cassandra Harris, followed years later by the heartbreaking loss of their daughter Charlotte to the same disease. These losses changed him. They made him fiercely protective, deeply reflective, and quietly dedicated to ensuring that the people he loved most would never face the hardships he once endured. What few knew was that during these years, Pierce began constructing a legacy, not for headlines, but for healing. He collected art, property, and long-term investments not out of extravagance, but because he saw them as anchors for the family he cherished. And alongside the financial planning, he started writing something far more precious, handwritten letters, sealed and stored, meant to be opened only when the time was right. By the time he reached his early 70s, Pierce had already stepped into a calmer life. He spent mornings painting in Hawaii, afternoons walking the shoreline with his wife Keely, and evenings reflecting on a life filled with both immeasurable love and unimaginable heartbreak. It was during these quiet moments that he finalized the plans that would one day bring his family to tears, not because he was leaving them money, but because he was leaving them the essence of who he was. Pierce Brosnan's journey into global stardom was dazzling, but beneath the elegance and charm, he carried a private determination that very few recognized. As the world saw him stride confidently across the screen as 007, wearing perfectly tailored suits and delivering lines with effortless charisma, Pierce was quietly building something far more significant than fame, a future for his family that would outlive him by generations. After the devastating loss of Cassandra Harris, Pierce faced a crossroads. He could have retreated from the public eye permanently, swallowed by grief. But instead, he chose to honor her memory by protecting the family she loved so fiercely. He adopted her children, Christopher and Charlotte, raising them as his own, and later welcomed 2 sons, Dylan and Paris, with Keeley. Every decision he made, career moves, investments, real estate purchases, had one constant motivation: stability for the people he adored. Hollywood brought immense wealth, but Pierce never lived like a man obsessed with money. While many of his peers flaunted their fortunes through sports cars, penthouses, and extravagant parties, Pierce gravitated toward meaning. He purchased homes not for luxury, but for refuge: a serene estate in Malibu, a peaceful island property in Hawaii, and an art-filled residence in Ireland where he felt closest to his roots. Each location, each object, each painting he created carried a story, a memory he hoped would one day guide his children when he could no longer walk beside them. But the true turning point came when Pierce received a private health warning in his mid-60s. Nothing life-ending, but serious enough to force him into a deep re-evaluation. Doctors urged him to slow down, reduce stress, prioritize longevity. For the first time, Pierce confronted the truth all parents eventually face: one day, his children would have to navigate the world without him. That realization hit harder than any diagnosis. He began documenting everything. In journals, he recorded stories from his childhood, tales he'd never spoken aloud. In letters, he wrote about Cassandra, about grief, about healing. In others, he spoke directly to Dylan and Paris, about resilience, humility, love, and the responsibility that comes with carrying the Brosnan name. For Charlotte and Christopher, he left reflections filled with memories of their mother, hoping to keep her presence alive through written word. Alongside these deeply personal writings, Pierce began organizing what those closest to him would later call the empire. His investments, once scattered across decades of film earnings, were consolidated. Art he had collected from around the world was catalogued, appraised, and assigned to specific family members, not based on financial value, but emotional significance. Some items went to his sons. Some to Keeley. Some to the grandchildren he adored. And some pieces, those that held memories too sacred to divide, were instructed to remain together forever, protected in a private family foundation he quietly formed. But it was his philanthropic decisions that brought the most tears. Pierce had long supported environmental causes, marine conservation, and cancer research, quietly writing checks without ever demanding recognition. Now, with his legacy on the line, he went further. A substantial portion of his estate, carefully structured through trusts, was designated to fund women's cancer research in honor of the 2 women he lost to the same illness. Another branch was dedicated to art scholarships for young Irish students, children who, like him, came from humble beginnings and needed only one chance to change their lives. His family knew he was generous. They knew he was thoughtful. But they had no idea how meticulously he had shaped his farewell. And when they first discovered what he had prepared, the magnitude of his love overwhelmed them. Because Pierce Brosnan wasn't leaving behind just a fortune. He was leaving behind a blueprint for healing, a legacy of compassion, and a lifetime of love written into every decision he made. As Pierce Brosnan's children slowly uncovered the depth of their father's preparations, they realized something remarkable: this was not a typical estate plan crafted by lawyers and accountants. It was a map of Pierce's heart, laid out with the precision of a man who understood both the fragility of life and the enduring power of love. The emotional impact hit hardest when they stumbled upon a set of carefully sealed envelopes stored inside a carved wooden box Pierce had owned for decades. Each envelope had a name written in his unmistakable handwriting. One for Keeley. One for each child. One for his grandchildren. And one simply labeled, "For when you need me." These letters weren't instructions. They weren't apologies or explanations. They were conversations he hoped could continue long after he was gone. For Dylan, he wrote about responsibility, how leadership wasn't about being perfect, but present. How his creative passions could shape the world if he stayed true to his vision. For Paris, he wrote with gentle warmth, reminding him that sensitivity was not weakness but a gift, one Pierce himself wished he had embraced earlier in life. For Christopher, he wrote about forgiveness, acknowledging mistakes of the past while urging him to focus on the man he could still become. For Charlotte, the words were pure love, memories of her mother, stories of childhood laughter, and lines meant to wrap around her like a warm embrace. And for Keely, the woman who rebuilt his heart after devastation, he left a letter filled with gratitude. Gratitude for her patience, companionship, and the second chance at love she gave him when he thought he had nothing left to offer. But the letters were only part of the emotional storm. Pierce had also prepared a legacy book, a thick leather-bound volume documenting his life through photographs, stories, sketches, and private reflections. Each chapter carried a theme: loss, love, resilience, gratitude. The final chapter, titled "When I Am No Longer Here," was a message, not of goodbye, but of guidance. It urged them to live boldly, love deeply, and carry his values forward rather than his memory like a burden. Though his family cried while reading these pages, they cried even harder when they discovered something Pierce had never spoken about publicly: the Foundation of Light. This private charity, entirely funded by Pierce's own income, was designed to continue operating long after he was gone. He had set aside millions to support cancer research, coastal preservation, and humanitarian aid projects around the world. But perhaps the most touching element was the Foundation's annual tradition: a grant given every December 28, Cassandra's birthday, to a young artist who had lost a parent and struggled to find their identity, just like Pierce once had. The symbolism was breathtaking. And then came the final piece, the part that made even the strongest members of the Brosnan family break down. Pierce had dictated instructions for a gathering to be held on a remote stretch of beach in Kauai. Not a memorial. Not a mourning ritual. But a celebration at sunset, with laughter, stories, and music, because he wanted his final memory in their hearts to be one of warmth rather than sorrow. He even detailed the playlist: songs he used to dance to with Cassandra, lullabies he hummed to his children, and the melodies Keely loved during their early years together. There was no extravagance in his farewell. No glamour. No performance. Just authenticity, the same authenticity he fought to protect throughout a lifetime of fame. By the end of the discovery process, one truth became undeniable: Pierce Brosnan's goodbye was not tragic because of money or mortality. It was tragic because of how deeply he loved, how carefully he prepared, and how profoundly his absence would be felt. And yet, every letter, every photograph, every donation, every instruction was a reminder of the legacy he wanted most. Not Bond. Not Hollywood. But family. In the weeks following their discovery of Pierce Brosnan's legacy plan, a quiet stillness settled over the family, an emotional pause, as though the world itself understood that they were holding something sacred. Everything Pierce had prepared now felt like a conversation with him, each page of a letter and each note in the legacy book echoing his voice, his wisdom, and his kindness. And then came the day of the gathering he had designed so meticulously. Just before sunset, the Brosnan family walked down the narrow path to the secluded beach on Kauai. The air was warm, the ocean calm, and the sky painted in soft hues of gold and lavender, the kind of sky Pierce loved to capture in his paintings. The sound of waves folding gently onto the sand created a natural rhythm, as if nature itself was honoring him. There were no cameras. No speeches. No rehearsed ceremony. Pierce had insisted on simple beauty. A long wooden table sat near the shore, decorated with candles and small framed photos from his life: his wedding to Cassandra, moments with Keely, snapshots of the children growing up, and pictures of Pierce smiling on film sets around the world. These weren't images of a movie star, they were images of a father, a husband, a friend, a man who had never forgotten where he came from. The family sat together, passing around food Pierce loved: fresh seafood, baked bread, tropical fruit, because he wanted the evening to taste like life, not loss. Soft music played from a small speaker, beginning with the Irish folk songs he grew up hearing and weaving into the Hawaiian melodies he fell in love with later in life. Every song held a memory. Then, as the sun touched the horizon, Keely opened the envelope marked with her name. One by one, each family member did the same. They read their letters in silence, tears slipping down their faces, not from despair, but from the overwhelming tenderness of Pierce's final words. He didn't write about wealth. He didn't write about regret. He wrote about love. Love that survived tragedy. Love that rebuilt broken lives. Love that stitched together a family from loss, hope, and second chances. When the letters were read, Dylan stood and lifted a small box Pierce had instructed him to bring. Inside were tiny glass vials filled with sand from places meaningful to Pierce: Navan, London, Malibu, Hawaii. The family walked to the water's edge and released the sand into the ocean, watching the grains swirl into the waves. It was symbolic of Pierce's belief that life's journey carried us through many places, but in the end, everything returned to the same vast, peaceful place. After the final wave carried the sand away, Keely opened the last envelope, the one labeled, "For When You Need Me." But Pierce had written something unexpected inside. "If you are reading this, then I am gone from this world but never from your lives. I do not want you to look for me in sorrow, but in beauty, in the sea, in the sky, in the art you create, in the memories that still make you smile. My legacy is not the fortune I leave, but the love we shared. Carry it forward. That is all I ever wanted." The family embraced, letting the sunset wash over them. There was sadness, yes. But there was also peace, a profound, grounding peace that came from knowing Pierce had lived exactly as he wanted, with purpose, resilience, and a heart open to love even after unimaginable loss. His financial empire, though impressive, was not the treasure that made his family cry. It was this moment. This love. This understanding that Pierce Brosnan had given them the greatest gift a man can leave behind. Not just wealth, not just memories, but a legacy of compassion that will guide generations.